is brand marketing dead? That is, are the days of brand building, brand equity, and spending all of your time as a marketer trying to develop brand codes and send signals out to the market that your brand is about X, Y, and Z, are those days over when you consider, one, whether there's an ROI on those activities in general, but also the macro environment right now with impending recession and kind of all the negativity that's out there. Are the days of brand marketing over, and the days of performance marketing here, or really the only part of marketing that makes any sense to pursue as a practitioner today? And the genesis of this recording was a conversation that I had with James Phillip, just around the idea of ROI, of course, and we had watched a clip together, where he had shared a clip with me of First Mark Capital's Rick Heitzman, who basically was looking at the share price of different companies, and I think if you consider the backdrop of Snap and Twitter, and then compare that to the performance of Google and these other platforms that and their advertising platforms work in different ways. Snap, Twitter, those platforms are primarily brand driven. You're as an advertiser, if you've done any marketing on those platforms, what you're paying for is the impression. How do you put your brand in front of as many people as possible? Whereas the Googles of the world, you're paying per click, and so you're paying for performance, conversion. You're getting in front your company in front of the person who's looking for your product and service at that particular time. And what Rick Heitzman was saying was that in a world like today, where companies are pulling back on their advertising spend, which is typically the first place that companies will pull back on, when you start to consider a downturn, because it's the easiest place to pull money from. Where are we seeing the biggest effect of that pullback? Well, we're seeing it in the earnings of the companies like this, the Snap and the Twitters and the Facebooks. And it's, the performance marketing platforms of Google are a little bit more enduring. But in thinking about that conversation, or that insight at least, that Rick Heitzman put out there, I think it was an interview with CNBC, James and I were talking about just the actual long-term impacts of whether brand versus performance, and is there even an equation there anymore? Is there value in spending your time on taglines and logos and tone of voice and typography, all these things, or as marketers, should we be spending basically all of our time thinking about the customer journey and thinking about how do we optimize landing pages so that when people are coming to our sites, we're getting some sort of information from that we can then act on as a sales lead? Are we better off, if we're going to spend on marketing, spending money on pay-per-click and getting really good on that side of things, because at least we know we can track ROI. The old kind of adage, or the old saying, was that on a long enough time horizon, you do brand marketing because one, there's not a ton of ROI in the short term, but that on a long enough time horizon, if you can build the Huggies of diapers, or if you can build the Coca-Cola of soft drinks, then on a long enough time horizon, then the brand starts to do the performance work for you. Whereas your cost of customer acquisition goes way down because the brand then does all the work, right? And which took us on in an area of our conversation where maybe brand marketing is a concept invented by these big companies to just protect their space, in the ecosystem. Are the only companies that are allowed to talk about brand marketing big ones, who've done all this work and are able to lean on things like brand, because they've got massive distribution already set, because they've got customer bases that when you go to your grocery store and you're thinking, I'm going to go buy a can of pop, or I'm going to go buy a 12-pack of pop, that you're going to get a Coca-Cola, and so is brand marketing a concept that only big brands can tap into? And then what does that mean for the rest of the market, the 99% of companies that aren't the big brand? And are we wasting time if we're spending our time thinking about brand equity and all these kind of things? Again, should we be putting all of our time and effort into the performance side, and really just maximizing each and every transaction and each and every conversion, and letting brand take whatever path it takes over a long enough time horizon. If you think about the best brands that have popped up in the last half a decade, there are a handful, I'd say. There's a suitcase company that comes to mind that I think built a lot of brand equity very quickly. This was, of course, a function of unbelievable times when it comes to access to capital and things. The amount of money poured into these brands to build a level of brand recognition. But it's almost like a roller coaster in terms of what that curve looks like. Big recognition up front, and then over the last couple of years, all these companies that I feel like gained a lot of attention have fallen off a cliff. I think a lot of them went on to IPO. I'm thinking now I've got a sneaker company that comes to mind that IPO'd, and their stock price has just fallen off a cliff as well. And I think that's a function of this belief that, okay, if you build enough brand equity, your unit economics, the conversions, all these things will take care of itself. And I don't think that's true. And I think as a more traditional kind of marketer, and I say that in terms of kind of my background in business, when I compare that to say James, who's really an expert at kind of like the guerrilla methodology and kind of boots on the ground, what actually works versus the theory. Thinking of brand versus performance is one of those things that I hadn't really thought about, that and it's really shaped a lot of what I think I'm going to be telling clients going forward. Thinking about even for our own kind of marketing work is, should we really be focusing more on the performance side and then leaving the brand stuff to, say, employer brand? I do think that there's value in building equity around, or brand equity around, how you are as an employer, because the talent side of the equation as a brand is still probably heavily driven by brand, right? The best talent will still go to the company that looks, smells, and feels the best to them, versus the one that can optimize the conversion of getting them on the site and getting them to submit a job application. I think people will still want to go work for the big brands, or the brands that they think speak to them. And I think that's not a function of size. I think that's a function of a few different other things, maybe ethics and image and other things, at least, that employer branding can appeal to. But on the true kind of commerce side, is brand marketing over? After today's conversation with James and thinking about this a little bit, I think it might be. The day of brand might be over. And then we really, as marketers, need to get good at the performance side and really looking at being data-driven, to be able to identify the right customers, to be able to identify the journey, the customer journey, making sure that user experience is such that you can capture lead data and what are you doing with that data once you have it? Have you got the sales team in place? Being consultants and guides on that side of the equation versus kind of the fluffy stuff around logos and colors and things, I think is probably the future of marketing. And I'd be curious if you're a marketing practitioner or just someone who's interested in marketing in general, to what your thoughts are on brand marketing versus performance marketing, because it's something that I think we might start to see a lot more of. The conversation, at least, especially as we go into a downturn, if that's on the short-term horizon, at least for us.